All right, I pressed the button and we're going. So we're podcasting. We have Jeff Iles here. Hi, Jeff.
Hello.
How is it in beautiful Pembroke today?
Oh, it's hot like the rest of the summer.
Jeff is sitting on a boardwalk in a beautiful, hot August summer's day and hating every minute of it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I count the days until the fall leaves change.
The only American I know that loves the coldness of the winter here in August.
It's why I came to Canada.
All right, Jeff. So rumor has it you came with an agenda.
Yeah, I want to talk about the confidence of vulnerability. It's this idea I've been kind of toying around about. And so before we even talk about what that means, I want to take you back in time to last January. And last January at the Super Bowl, if you recall, do you recall anything about it?
I think I had KFC on Super Bowl.
Good, that's important. But so at the game, it was the Denver Broncos playing against the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah.
And the quarterback of the Denver Broncos is Peyton Manning, who, for me, it's a great thing because I grew up in Indianapolis, and Peyton Manning has always been the star quarterback of the Colts for the past 12 years or so. And then he went to Denver. And one of the big things about this game is that Manning was getting a ton of credit for being terrible. And people might be wondering why that is. And part of the reason is because people are giving him a lot of credit for recognizing his limitations and living within himself finally. And even though he was awful from a quarterbacking standpoint, by recognizing his limitations in that situation, he was able to lead his team to that Super Bowl victory because he was able to give up that star status that he had taken. And I mean, I speak from experience in watching the Colts for so long. When he would just try and, when things were getting bad, he would just try and put the entire team on his back, and it would always fail because
Trying to win the game every play, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, he would not recognize that like he has limitations. And so once he kind of figured that out and allowed himself to step back from that, they were able to take over. The defense was great, and so they were able to win. And
know your strengths, know your weaknesses, kind of stuff you're talking about.
Yeah, but you have to actually know what your weaknesses are, and you have to actually, once you know them, then there's power in knowing what they are. Because once you know what your box is, there's power in knowing exactly where your box ends. Because then you can know what kind of support, when you can rely on support, when you can reach out to someone else, and you can feel confidence in letting somebody else do their job.
I think this is a theme. Now, I like your particular framework of it. It's very eloquent. But this is a theme that I've heard a lot in, or been reading a lot about in leadership. Leadership, right? This idea of knowing that and owning that and coming out pretty straightforward with it so that people can understand where you're coming from, right?
Yeah, and I think and I want to contrast that with if you've been staying with the football theme for a second, if you've been watching Netflix, there's a show called Last Chance U. That's a series right now, follows a community college, and the logic is that these are all superstar players, like top recruits in high school, that couldn't be successful in their 4-year university, and so they've been transferred to this tiny little community college who's super dominant in football, and this is their last chance to get back to the big time. And there are a ton of current NFL players that have come through this place, but there's also a ton of talent that just can't make it academically. And
also, it's like a fifth year, like instead of playing their fifth year at their
no, not a fifth year. This is like they went to university for the first year and had issues, whether they be academic, whether they be behavioral, whether they be criminal, whatever reason, they were told to leave their gigantic superstar university, and they had to figure out a way to get back onto the football field. And so this is their last chance to make it back into the limelight.
Was this a real thing?
It's a real, yeah. That's the role of a lot of the community colleges, especially for football. That's their role, is they take those students who are have academic issues, so they go on academic probation, they're academically ineligible, and they lose their scholarship. They drop down to the community college level to build that back up. And the show focus, although the show is all about football, it focuses around an academic advisor and her role of trying to shepherd these students to get to that successful mark, because they have to hold a certain grade point average to get to Division I. And I think, and when you look at Peyton Manning and what he went through, a lot of these guys just have not come to grips with what their limitations are. They'd rather thrive on the football field, and they're not ready to say, I need help in the academic world, because they are so strong physically and so strong within the gamesmanship. And
So if
so if
you,
they go ahead.
okay, great. So know my weaknesses, accept my weaknesses, work around them or work in supporting them. But is there the risk that that sort of ideology will box up and put away? So I'm not good at whatever. So I'm not, let's say for argument's sake, I'm not good at organization. So I'll own that, but then I'm not going to work on it.
No, it's not about not working on it. It's about recognizing it and working on it, but also recognizing that you're not the star of organization. That you can, whenever there's somebody who's a star of organization, you can look to them for support. But the other thing is that not just not recognize it, but just denying it all out is what's going on with this last chance you. And I think that happens just across the board in any kind of business, where exposing your vulnerability is going to be such a weakness that you're afraid to even do it.
See, that's interesting. So that's a different thing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
not acknowledging weaknesses, but rather just not even acknowledging that a weakness is there, right? Could be.
Right.
That's interesting, and I can imagine that coming up through students for sure.
Oh yeah. Well, not. I mean, I'd rather take the focus off students and just focus on teachers.
All right.
Because if you focus on, if you think about teachers, I know I have teachers in my mind that like just weren't good at a couple of different things, but didn't ask for help. Like they could thrive in other aspects of their classroom management or other aspects of their instruction, but they didn't ask for help or support, or they didn't reach out and try and better this other aspect of it. So then it brought their entire teaching ability down. So because it brought it down to the lowest common denominator of their skills. And so you may have these peaks and valleys as a talented teacher, but if you're not trying to recognize what your valleys are, then your peaks are not as valuable.
Okay, so I had a really interesting thought experiment presented to me this morning, Jeff.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, I'm ready.
So it was, all right, it's a year from now, and we're in this room, and you just won an award for innovation in education. What's your acceptance speech? And okay, that's interesting. And so I was thinking, okay, well, what was it that I got recognized for? So I got this idea that I think the most innovative thing that can happen in education right now, so specifically with the technology they're working with, if somebody can figure out how to really effectively create a streamlined, collaborative system between teachers where there is sort of real authentic collaboration between colleagues on lesson preparing and delivering, I think that is going to be the most innovative and powerful thing that could happen in education. And I think that plays with what you're saying. So if we create some kind of system using a set of tools, Google Docs, et cetera, where you're doing real collaboration and you're acknowledging that you have weaknesses and strengths, then that collaboration could be, particularly authentic, and you're going to end up with the best possible product that then goes to the students.
Well, but you also have to recognize that collaboration has weaknesses and strengths. And so it's not just about your weaknesses and strengths, it's about the tool's weaknesses and strengths too. And so if you recognize all of that, and all of that is up front, then you can have power in that situation. The idea for this kind of theme, this confidence and vulnerability, came from the story. I was listening to this radio show where this woman who was newly had vision problems and was newly blind, and so she said that all of a sudden when she would walk into places and she just didn't know who was in the room or anything, like slowly she had this there was a little bit of confidence in just being able to say like, who's there? And at first, like, it was scary, as in a scared who's there, but eventually, because she knew it was a vulnerability, she would just say it, and it was just part of like feeling out the room.
Well, if you know what you don't know, then it's not scary or upsetting when someone points it out to you, right? If you have a weakness that you're aware of and you've identified and you're working on it, and someone says, okay, you're not this, and you already know it, then
Yeah.
confidence plays.
But I think that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge their weaknesses in a public way.
No, well, no, they certainly don't.
But I think if more of us did,
but that could be a power, right? I mean, I've
yeah,
certainly been in an environment where I like to play athletics because I've definitely felt that way before. And I'm thinking right now of examples of when this happened to me, and definitely in athletics, um, not knowing what you don't know is so much scarier than knowing what you don't know. It still might be a little bit embarrassing that you're not as good at X skill as you'd like to be, but if you know that you're not and you're willing to own that, then growth can happen, right?
yeah, and you can find a corner of success. And like I feel like so much of I feel like the concept of innovation, if we go back to that idea, is tied to superstardom. And I think that I think all of our ideas need to be so much smaller, and our goals and our big thoughts need to be so much more micro.
All right, unpack that a bit.
Well, because I think that it's very easy to hop, skip, and a jump from your idea to imagining that the entire world can embrace your idea, but you don't see the gaps in it. You don't see the vulnerabilities because it all makes sense to you.
Right.
Whereas I think if you want to perfect your idea, the reach that you have is not much greater from a perfection point of view than your physical reach. And so figuring out how to extend that physical reach just outside of your own physical reach, to me, that's innovation. But that's very small. And I'm not going to have a huge impact on a ton of people, but the people I do have a huge impact, I'm going to have a gigantic impact.
Right, but you can't perfect on a macro scale. So you need to build in steps. Right? Like I was saying, that idea of collaboration, like I just never seen it. Like if I could see that work between three teachers or two teachers amongst one group, and then you figure what the gaps are, and then you build it to a school, figure what the gaps are, and then build it to a sister school, figure what the gaps are, and go to a board. Like that would be logical.
Right, but I think but I mean, just getting to the point where so you're already at the board level when you've never seen it.
No, not
Whereas,
at
well,
all.
but I mean, but it was so easy for you to take that, to build those steps in your mind, when like the steps maybe to get it to three teachers is so many more tiny little steps that just have to take place. And I think we get frustrated in the little steps, and it gets in the way.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely, that happens for sure.
So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. These are all it's kind of like I'm a big fan of contrarianism. And I feel like dreaming is wonderful, and I feel like if we're in order to have really good dreams, we have to have really good contrary opinions.
Someone's got to dream the dreams, and someone's got to punch holes in them.
That's exactly right. So that way
Beautiful puncher, Jeff.
everyone can fill the holes then together. And there's your collaboration.
There you go. Well, I mean, that is a piece, and that is something that I certainly I have a few different people that I lean on of going in and saying, okay, here's my idea. What's wrong with it? Which maybe is a step that's hard for some. I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, I think that's the confidence of your vulnerability right there. Is you recognize that you have some vulnerability, even though you may not know what exactly it is, you know that you have some blind spots, and that's having confidence to ask somebody to find them.
Okay, so then thinking about this contrary thing, confidence and vulnerability, what's your thought on sort of the trendiness of embracing failure and failure resumes and things of that nature?
I think
that's the inverse side of what you're saying, right?
Well, kind of. I don't know. Why do you think it's the inverse side?
Because if you have confidence your confidence is understanding your vulnerability is building up your confidence, is what you're saying, yes. Right? Confidence and vulnerability. Okay. And then right now there's a big movement of somehow posting or making visible failures.
Okay.
So I think that would be show it like you're demonstrating your vulnerability. You're not demonstrating your confidence. It's the same thing. You're creating confidence through demonstrating your vulnerability, but what you're demonstrating, the piece that you're showing forward is the vulnerability.
Yeah, or at least I mean, I see it with that as just even the steps before being confident about putting that out is just acknowledging that it exists. And I think there's a difference between acknowledgement and confidence. And so if I know that it's good, but I'm still embarrassed by it versus I know that I can't do it and I'm just past it, the getting from the acknowledgement stage to confidence stage, I think that's a huge jump that everyone is always working on.
I've got a failure resume that I'm slowly going back to like once every 2 months. And
Okay.
one of the things that I noticed was it was actually at first hard for me to think about the things that I failed. Like not hard as in embarrassing, but hard as in to sort of accurately pinpoint them on them. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think as a coping mechanism, we don't highlight those. Right? You highlight in your head,
Yes.
highlight your successes. You don't highlight your failures. You hide your failures. And like it's all
Right.
well good to say you learn from them, but that's actually fairly challenging
Not then.
going, right?
Yes. So then so if you haven't been able to, so if you had trouble finding them, then
Well, I
that's
thought that
kind of,
exercise of finding them was actually pretty useful because you
yeah,
actually
that's why, yeah.
spend some time to think about it and work your way through back in your brain a bit about like, okay, well, oh, okay, this was a failure. Now this was a thing that didn't work as I wanted it to. And you can get them if you dig into them, but you have to dig into them, which shows two things. I mean, it shows that it's not on the forefront of your mind, but also that there's value in it, right? That
Yeah.
exercise, it's just all it is macro reflection.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I think, I don't know. I'm kind of stuck.
Not very contrary, Jeff.
Yeah. Yeah. Failure resumes are terrible. Everyone should just succeed.
All right, so let me prompt you on your next stage. Whilst I introduced this podcast by saying you had an agenda, I heard you have a secondary agenda.
Yeah. I think, you and your guests talk way too much about students.
Oh, okay.
I think within education, that's a real mistake that we make. And I think that if we try and use a parallel world of like cooking and a chef, I don't when I think about a restaurant, I'm not talking about the customers. And so when I'm thinking about a school, why am I talking about the students, and why am I not talking about the teacher? So
Is the analogy off though with cooking and chef, and is it the food piece, not the customers?
I don't know. That's kind of this is kind of what
Because I'm
I'm.
feeling like they're almost not exclusive, right? Because I'm assuming, and you tell me what you think, but like if you do the why, like, oh, well, why should I talk more about teachers? Why should I talk more about teachers? Because the statistics show that the single most influential factor in a student's success is the teacher they have. Therefore, if I have the best teacher, I'll have the best success in students, right?
Yes, that is my opinion.
Right. So, but they're the same thing. Because if you're saying,
We
I want to talk about student success, and you're saying, I want to talk about teacher quality because it directly supports student success.
But I think when people talk about when people spend their time talking about students, they can get caught up. They can get caught up in taking the focus off of teachers in terms of success or failure, because it gives people an out of having a bad year because they had a bad mix of students.
Okay.
And I think that if you always are talking about the students, you're also not talking about the talent of the teacher. And I think if we're talking about students, especially, you can talk about them kind of as being the teacher suddenly becomes a facilitator and not a teacher.
Yeah.
And so I'm very, and like I used to be a fan of the concept of facilitating the education, and now I'm not 100% sure I'm behind that anymore.
Oh yeah, there's the guide on the side. Not a huge fan of that.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know. It's just I don't know. What do you think?
Well,
Are you a facilitator of people's education, or are you a teacher?
I think it depends sometimes, but I think I prefer the facilitator. I think that student voice is a bit stronger than sometimes we give credit for. I think it's more effective younger than people realize. Um, I think the sage on the stage and direct feed education can kind of be the quick fix. You can get a lot from that real quick, or a high percentage of people can get a lot from that real quick. But it's not particularly authentic. It doesn't go deep. It doesn't stay. I think you'll get a lot more sort of real learning without trying to load that term. But if you can kind of get what I'm driving at, um,
Yeah.
from an environment that you've got someone guiding you versus spoon feeding you. So I think it kind of depends on what the piece of education is that you're trying to deliver. But if I was going to speak holistically and looking at what I would like in sort of my dream school, and my dream team of teachers, I feel like the facilitator um, makes more sense. But I do see the contrast for sure.
Well, so because when I imagine a school that has a bunch of facilitators, then to me the actual persona of the facilitator is kind of interchangeable, and maybe the content is what's important, maybe it's the student interaction that's what's important, and the teacher has much less value in that school when I imagine using that word. And but I mean, the stats show the best, most important thing in a child's education
Well,
is
I
the
think it's
teacher.
harder. Like as far as a skill, like walking into a class,
As far as,
right.
but I mean, but I think I guess maybe what I'm
It's
saying
more
is the
behind it,
moment
but
we
it's more
start,
subdued, right?
yeah, well, maybe what I'm saying is that the more we use the word facilitator, it's almost like we are minimizing the role of that person in the room.
But a subdued
And
role doesn't mean a minimalized role.
but I think that from the outside looking in,
It feels that way.
using because a facilitator, when you go out, when you go into corporate training, and somebody who facilitates some training as a corporate trainer, that means that they are simply presenting material that has already been pre-created. And I think that that is the from. I mean, people who are within education recognize that if I facilitate a child's education, that doesn't mean the exact same thing as a corporate trainer. But outside, I think when we're thinking about how money is spent and how people view education and all of that outside world, I think that using the word facilitator versus teacher really hurts our
Well,
cause.
like, so I don't use facilitator, and I
But do you use facilitate?
don't. No, I don't use either. I use teacher, and I think it's
Okay.
more about thinking what that teacher role is rather than changing that role. Right? You're still the teacher. I don't think it's,
Yeah.
I don't think it's taking away from educators and teachers to say that the way you go about presenting your material is different because it's always being different, right? Teaching and educating, and like any other profession, is going to evolve and change. It doesn't change the name of the profession. And facilitator does feel like subdued or less valued, and you don't want that. And I do believe that there needs to be flexibility, and ownership on that teacher. Somebody from, oh, I forget who it was. Someone on CBC Auto Morning the other day was talking. It was a Ottawa U educator was talking about professional, the professionalism of teachers and giving them that right, giving
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
They get to understand who their kids are and get to see when they do what things, right? And we've been in the class that sometimes just needs you to stand up and deliver the material for a minute and get through it and move on to something else. It can't always be genius hour. It can't always be, these other sorts of things. But at the same time, it can't always be sage on the stage.
Right.
So I think it's just an evolution of what it means to be a teacher versus changing the title.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think so. I know that when you get into higher ed, there's a lot more talk of facilitation of learning
Okay.
as a style. And again, within the college system in Canada, a lot of the college instructors and professors may not have the same teaching background, so that might be a logical sense. And the material is a little bit more canned, so that may be a little bit more logical. But I think I'm concerned that that is going to trickle down all the way into the kindergarten level.
Well, that would be a real problem if we're talking about canned material. Was that? I mean,
Yeah,
I really don't think that's the answer. And like, you'd like to think that if what you're doing is facilitating, supporting, and having student voice lead, well, then it should be really your problem should be that it's going way away from the curriculum, because what's important and what's valued to students is what becomes the forefront, not
yeah,
what's on
totally.
the page and what's brought
Hmm.
to by pre-canned information. Is like, to me, that's what I see someone who's stepping away from the front doing, is their classes becoming much more fluid and much more centered around what is relevant to that group of students.
That, yeah, but the problem with that is that you still have benchmarks that you want to hit from a societal level, and you still and trying to figure out keep your eye on the prize of both making sure that you're
Well,
completely student centered and
that's what
keep making sure you're hitting those benchmarks.
that's where I think your talent piece plays.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, yeah.
I heard a guy the other day that was saying, uh, curriculum, get rid of it. There's no need for that. I don't want bells. I don't want subjects. I can manage all those things on my own. For example, my kids went outside and at recess they had conflict. They came back inside. We talked about conflict, and we ended up not only like mitigating and solving that conflict, but then we kept going about conflict in general. Talked about the Middle East, et cetera, and et cetera, et cetera, which is like what an awesome, authentic learning that like really makes sense and hits all the curriculum points and works. But that guy had some talent.
Like I had some talent, and he had awareness that that's what should be taught at that age.
Right. So he's got skill and talent and understanding of all these things that need to happen together, which is putting a huge amount of trust in that teacher, which in this case worked out just great. But if you put that to another teacher who has no idea about the conflict in the Middle East and has no idea how to work timing and things like that, then it absolutely wouldn't work.
Right.
So the talent piece comes in, and how do you solve that problem? Like, is maybe more investment on the front end in teachers college, or more investment in training, more class time? I'm not totally
I'd,
sure. But.
even before that, more investment in recruiting, getting the star, getting the talent, and then molding it into the teacher, as opposed
Finding
to
out what are the things that one requires to be very good at to be a good teacher, and then pull those folks in instead of trying to take the generic blob and turning them into a teacher.
or the people who want to be teachers but may not have talent.
Right. So
And
just because
so
I really want to be in the NBA doesn't mean they're going to put me in there. Is that what you're saying?
totally. And if you really, I mean, and getting and making sure that we draw the line between teachers and tutors, because I think a lot of people come into teaching and thinking they're just going to be glorified tutors.
Yeah. Well, those are totally different, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think that there's a space for really good tutors, but that's not what teaching is, because tutoring is simply figuring out what the material that's already been presented and then explaining it in a different way as opposed to explaining it the first time.
Right.
And tutoring is much more of a reinterpretation. It's a skill unto itself.
Yeah, absolutely. But figure what that definition is, I suppose. I suppose is it's a big player.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
All right,
but
Jeff.
all
I like
right.
hearing I like hearing no productive dissidence. Thank you.
Yeah, the weekend it's time to begin.
All right. Well, thanks for coming out. I appreciate it. Always fun to talk to you.
All right, sounds good. Talk to you later.